This Power Mac setup has one big issue. Notice anything? We have a fantastic cinema display, but we have two keyboards and no mouse. Now I do have several mice that are good to go and I can install one of them in the setup and use it as is, but none of them actually match the theme here that we're going for. This of course is a Power Mac G5, but we do have an acrylic theme with the cinema display and this keyboard. Now I could just use this and call it a day, but this is more of a universal mouse, at least that's what I'm calling it, because I use this with a variety of different systems. Right now it's in use with the MacBook here and it does actually match the theme. However, when it's actually in the Y2K setup, it really doesn't match the rest of the accessories. So what's the solution? Just get a new mouse, right? Well, if only it was that simple. Oh wait, it is. Now this mouse definitely needs a good clean, but that's the whole point of today's video. So what about the keyboards? This one has been restored, this one hasn't. As you can see, this one is looking fantastic, but the other one, not so much. So why don't we just remove this one and use this? There's one big problem. Spacebar doesn't work. That's right, spacebar on this actually works, but on the fully restored one, we have nothing. As you can imagine, this causes quite a bit of problems because, well, space is used all the time. The only reason I kept this though is because it does look nice and I am currently using it as an extra USB hub, but once this is fully restored, this will be removed and we will have a fully functional and awesome looking setup. So hopefully by the end of today's video we will have this keyboard and mouse looking just as new as this keyboard. So here's a final view at how the keyboard and the mouse looks, and as you can see, these are not exactly fun to use as they are right now. Now we'll talk more about the mouse later on, but first off we'll start with the keyboard because it's going to require a lot more time and a lot more work. Now here I have my homemade keycap puller, which is working really well. I've used this with other keyboards in the past and it just continues to work like there's no tomorrow. Now the keycaps themselves are in good condition, but as you can see, underneath them hides another story. Fortunately, the keycaps have no signs of yellowing, which is really nice, which means I don't have to retrobrite or do anything like that. All I have to do is clean it up. The more keycaps I remove, the worse it gets, but this isn't the worst I've seen. I've restored far worse keyboards and they cleaned up really well, so I'm having high expectations for this and I'm sure it's going to turn out really nicely. So I want to show you guys the most interesting parts of the process here, but at the same time, I don't want to bore you with repetitive content. Now, this is a very time-consuming thing, but at the same time, it's doing a lot of the same here. So for example, there are a lot of keys that we have to clean up, and I am cleaning all of them by hand, one by one. I want to make sure this is as clean as it can possibly be. And well, what you're seeing right now was basically my life for I don't even know how long. It must have been at least an hour, if not two. And then not to mention, all of these keys have to dry as well. So I left them to dry for at least 48 hours because even after a full day, there still are remnants of water, so I just wanted to make sure everything was as dry as possible before we start rebuilding the keyboard. So all that time spent on cleaning the keycaps was shortened down to around a minute. Now next up, I'm using some Q-tips here to clean up the big dirt and debris on the frame itself. Now I'm still going to disassemble the whole thing, but I just wanted to get rid of the big dust so it doesn't go all over the place once I actually start taking it apart. I know the acrylic itself is just in okay shape, but this one is actually in better condition, especially when you compare it to the other one. Dirt and debris though is a whole other thing, and we're going to continue this assembly here with our iFixit toolkit. There are 3 screws we need to remove to open it up, and it's very important to disconnect those cables because we don't want to damage the contacts here. Now this might be the first time this keyboard has been opened up, and despite that, it is surprisingly dirty inside, which is Honestly, kind of impressive when you think about it, considering how well this is closed up. The cover for the cable is out of the way, and we can begin to remove the inner plastic piece here from the acrylic housing. Now, I will be able to remove the cable itself from the acrylic so we can completely wash that, but in terms of the inner plastic piece here, I can't easily remove it from the electronics, so I will be cleaning that up with isopropyl alcohol instead of just washing it in the sink. Just like the keycaps, this also took some time and patience, but fortunately it was way faster, and the end result is really nice. Obviously it's still scratched up, but at least it's clean. While we wait for that to dry, I also moved on to the keyboard part of the keyboard itself, starting with the cable and the inner white plastic piece. As you can see, this is actually surprisingly dirty. It's one thing to see how it is, but it's another to see what actually got picked up by the isopropyl alcohol. And the inside part of the keyboard was in far worse condition than the cable itself, which really didn't make any sense at all. But as you can see, because this inner part was protected by the acrylic, it cleaned up very nicely, and it genuinely does look like a brand new component now. It just goes to show that isopropyl alcohol is just as good as warm soapy water, at least whenever it makes sense. Now the keycaps may have taken forever to clean, but this part is by far the longest in terms of disassembly and reassembly because the entire backplate here has a whole bunch of screws, and first I'm removing the decorative plastic piece because that also has to be washed, so I put it off to the side for a second. But as I'm removing the screws, I made sure to not lose the position of where they were, because even if they are the exact same, I want to put the same ones back in, just in case there is a minor difference. Now, I also cleaned up the back plate off camera with isopropyl alcohol, same with the contacts, and I also washed all the membrane components with soapy water, but that was also off camera. Here though, we can see the inner plastic frame is being cleaned up, and it turned out really nicely. I also saw that there was a date code on the back, and according to that, this one was made in 2004, so a little bit newer, but it does match my Power Mac G5. With everything finally cleaned up, we can begin reassembly. If only it was this fast to actually clean up a keyboard in real life. It's very nice to see it actually reassembled here in the span of a couple of minutes, but unfortunately that's the biggest downside of cleaning any keyboard. With this one, it's especially worth it to do a deep clean like this because of its design. Sure, you could get away with just a simple wipe down and it would still work, but with every keyboard that I still have to clean up, ideally I would do it just like this. It is very repetitive and time consuming, but it's worth it. It's also very important to not forget about that LED because if you do, that's a very expensive mistake, especially because of all those screws you have to deal with. The caps lock key is obviously for that LED, and as you can see with the first key back in, it's starting to take shape, and I even brought over the other keyboard to help me with reassembly here. And just like that, it's done. If only it was that fast again, but at least here we have the magic of video editing, and the result is fantastic. It's always nice to have another keyboard good to go and finally cleaned up. And on the back side here, you can actually see the acrylic where even though it is scratched up, at least it doesn't have deeper scratches like on the other keyboard. And now it's time for the mouse. There's not that much I can do in terms of the cosmetics, but I am just focused on cleaning it up anyways. I don't have anything for polishing, but I'm sure it'll still look great. I guess at one point it also cost $2.99, which I'm sure has been on this mouse for forever. The cable itself has a minor amount of damage, but apart from that, it's in good condition. It just needs to be cleaned up. Now, I'm not going to disassemble this mouse because of the way it's constructed. It does require adhesive to reassemble, and it really just doesn't seem worth it, especially considering there really isn't that much going on with this mouse. The cable itself was definitely dirty, and surprisingly, it was worse on the second pass than the first. But as you can see, The final result is still scratched up, but it is looking far cleaner and it's definitely far nicer to actually handle. Now, the important part about this mouse is that it does work because, well, this is a single button mouse. It has nothing else going on. So if that didn't work, then, well, you can't really do anything with it. There was a moment in history when this was cutting edge. Why did we move away from this? The rest of the setup might still be a work in progress, but this is looking better and better every time I see it, and I honestly can't even describe how awesome it is to actually see this finally assembled as it is. We have the mouse, the functional keyboard, and the almighty cinema display. This is such an awesome setup, and I can't wait to use it even more. As for the mouse pad, I still will use it, but I took it off just to show you guys how it looks without it. And even though that one doesn't really match the setup here, I would like to find an Apple mouse pad, kind of like the ones for Final Cut Pro or something similar from back in the day, because honestly that would really make this look even better than it currently is. The awesome part about this setup is that it provides a lot of flexibility for the Macs around this time period. It looks really great with the G5 here, but if we have an acrylic Mac here, it'll look just as cool. The mouse has a red LED with the optical sensor here, but honestly that just adds to the 2000s charm here. I'm honestly speechless with this setup. It is so cool. We actually have an awesome dedicated Y2K area. I want to try and use this more and more because this was during a time when stuff actually worked. Now don't get me wrong, it wasn't perfect either, but at least with this, you didn't have to be connected to the internet all the time. You don't have to pay a subscription to use your applications, and most importantly, the computers were actually upgradable. At least with modern technology, I'm able to use a 3TB hard drive here to make the most out of the G5. That pretty much wraps up today's video, but if you want to see more about the cinema display, I'll have it linked right up here, or if you want to see more about the G5, it'll be right here. As always though, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.